Now we have an update to a WSAZ investigation. Deadly details denied. We have been telling you about a teenager in Boone County. Investigators say died from child neglect. Since her death, we have obtained records from state police and a whistleblower showing that CPS knew about that child.
But the head of the agency repeatedly denying any involvement and now threatening criminal prosecution of anyone who releases information.
In this photo, you see a seemingly happy young girl, Kyneddi Miller, her life cut short at 14 years old. Investigators finding her body in a skeletal state in April inside of her home in Boone County. They say she had not eaten for months. Deputies charging her mother and 2 grandparents with child neglect resulting in death. All 3 pleading not guilty to the charge. The girl's death causing us to ask for weeks, how could this happen? And what did state officials and Child Protective Services know before she died?
You know, Curtis, the CPS folks, from what I understand, had no idea about this child. No idea whatsoever.
At that time, we asked Department of Human Services to verify the governor's comments. A spokesperson for the Department of Human Services instead directing me to this press release on the state's confidentiality law. But I found that release made no mention of this portion of the law, which states, in the case of a child neglect fatality, the state shall make public information relating to the case. I even found a federal manual which explains that law is meant to inform the public with basic information, including any prior history between the child and CPS. Just exactly the request we made using the state's Freedom of Information Act. Our request denied. But soon after, the governor did arrange for me to sit down exclusively with Department of Human Services Secretary Cynthia Pursley. She claims there is no history with Kyneddi.
You're saying there was no telephone calls about this kid, there was no referrals about this kid, there was no investigations about this kid, there was nothing with this kid's name on it in your agency.
That's correct.
But an anonymous letter received exclusively by WSAZ tells a much different story. It details 2 referrals to CPS involving Kyneddi, one in 2009, another in 2017. The letter even includes intake numbers assigned to the cases, along with dates, times, and even the names of supervisors and workers. According to the letter, Kyneddi's name is listed in the CPS system both times. Then, this audio and call log WSAZ obtained from West Virginia State Police references a 3rd referral involving Kyneddi. In the audio, you hear a trooper talking with a dispatcher after a welfare check on the teen in March 2023.
And you note on that CAD call reference that welfare check that I just made that CPS referral. Just put it in the note column.
Our WSAZ investigation prompting lawmakers to send the agency letters with questions. Their letters leading to this closed-door meeting Tuesday with Secretary Pursley and members of the governor's staff. We waited outside the door for Secretary Pursley, hoping to get some answers. But the secretary wouldn't say a word.
Secretary Pursley, the whistleblower and state police say that your agency had prior knowledge of that teenager. Is that true? Is that true? Are state police and the whistleblower lying? What'd you guys say today? What information were you able to share?
But just hours after that silence, the secretary had a lot to say in this statement, attacking WSAZ for releasing information from the whistleblower in our investigation. In her statement, Secretary Pursley says, unfortunately, the Department of Human Services never received an abuse or neglect referral relating to the death of Kyneddi Miller and was therefore not involved in the life of this child prior to her passing. Additionally, we are aware of information suggesting that West Virginia State Police intended to make a referral on this child in March 2023. However, a comprehensive search of DOHS records suggests no referral was ever made. So we went back to state police. They would not go on camera, but did tell us Wednesday. The agency stands behind the call log and audio, referring to the CPS referral made in March 2023. Secretary Pursley then saying, despite what has been reported by WSAZ, previous cases from 2009 and 2017 have nothing to do with the death of this young lady. We are extremely disappointed by the disclosure of information relating to those prior matters by an anonymous informant and by members of the local media, even going on to say the department is prepared to make any and all criminal referrals to the appropriate authorities regarding this disclosure. again personally saying nothing when I offered her the chance. But as we walked, our own Sarah Sager asking lawmakers about the secretary repeatedly saying her agency had absolutely no prior knowledge of Kyneddi.
So do you feel that they were justified in not telling us the entire truth?
I think that probably it should have been handled a lot better than it was. I think that they were off guard with the questions, not to mean they shouldn't be asked, and not that they shouldn't have been prepared to answer them.
We also turned to West Virginia University law professor Patrick McGinley for perspective. Are we on solid standing seeking this information?
You're doing what you should do. This is what freedom of the press in this country is about.
Was that statement she put out last night responsible?
I think it's totally irresponsible and inconsistent with her duty as a secretary of one of the most important government agencies in West Virginia, to blame others rather than be transparent, which is obviously what this situation calls for. She digs herself deeper and makes threats that are not based in law or fact.
Curtis Johnson, WSAZ, News Channel 3, Charleston.
But the story doesn't end there. While Curtis broke away to try to talk to Secretary Pursley, I waited to speak with lawmakers about what they learned in their meeting with her. However, while waiting for that interview, the governor's chief of staff could be heard yelling about our efforts down the halls of the Capitol. We are allowed to be here, and we are not. You hear that? Allowed to be here. That distant voice you hear is from this man, Governor Jim Justice's chief of staff, Brian Abraham, yelling down a hall of the West Virginia Capitol Tuesday that, quote, Channel 3 is banned. This while Curtis Johnson and I were working to learn more about the 14-year-old girl from Boone County who died in a case of alleged child neglect. Abraham can be heard saying, quote, you're not very good at your job. Allowed to be. He goes on to say, quote, you are not doing a very good job at all. And we are not allowed to talk to anybody else because we're doing our job. That's what we're just told. Okay. It'll be reported. All of this playing out as I was waiting to interview Senator Eric Tarr and Speaker of the House Roger Hanshaw about their closed-door meeting with the Department of Human Services and members of the governor's staff. Yeah, nobody's allowed to talk to us anymore because we're at the Capitol in a taxpayer building. Please roll on all of this. Where we're doing our job as journalists. We are doing our job in a taxpayer-funded building, and we are no longer allowed to be talked to, according to Brian Abraham.
Well, you're allowed to talk to us.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would like to know what happened at that meeting.
So we met with Secretary Pursley and some of the governor's staff down there about the stuff around a child in Boone County who was found starved to death.
Secretary Pursley earlier this month repeatedly denying to WSAZ that the Department of Human Services ever knew about Kyneddi Miller. But our WSAZ investigation found that's just not true. Lawmakers Tarr and Hanshaw say in the meeting, leaders of the department told them why they were withholding information.
Yeah, and those cases are not Kyneddi specific, they're Kyneddi adjacent. That's where the confidentiality part comes into those, and they were able to show that to us. That when you have it not directly related to the child specifically, it's something they can't disclose in the public disclosure.
Here's what I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around. We know, and we have the audio recording of last year, state police making a CPS referral, yet Curtis was told by Ms. Pursley over and over and over again, at least 4 times, that there was no referral. And that one I know was Kyneddi specific, not Kyneddi adjacent. So how is that one not coming into play?
That's part of one of the questions that we had asked too, that gets into the prosecutorial side of an investigation on why is there not a case number for that and where did it originate from. So there's I have no documentation or no ability to say that they have any right now that call is recorded anywhere beyond that call, and that's one of the issues that I think has to be looked at in the process. From my perspective as legislator, one of the things I want to make sure of is that we have processes that aren't broken,
This is a 14-year-old. I have a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. This 14-year-old was 40 pounds, starved to death on a mat. That's unfathomable. My 9-year-old weighs like 60 pounds. So it angers me because federal law says it's not whether the lawmakers want to tell us about it, it's whether the public wants to know. And the public wants to know about this, and they're demanding to know about this. We're getting tweets and emails constantly saying, what's happened? What's the next update? The grandparents were arrested yesterday, and we are constantly stonewalled by the executive branch. As you can see, we're going to be stonewalled even further. And that's what has me fired up, is we're doing our job as journalists. Do you feel like you all, it's a check and balance? Do you feel...
We have to do our job as legislators in much the same way. We have to learn what we can and then craft a law based on circumstances that transpire here in the state. We're very we're quite sympathetic to that.
And there's good reason for you to ask questions. And then also, I think you would agree that in the process, you wouldn't want a prosecution of somebody who was responsible for any part of that process and that child's harm failing because of them disclosing information that could impair that investigation going forward, to make sure that that person answers for what they did. So in that process, and that's, I honestly believe, having had the conversations in there and understand why they were trying to stonewall this, because they were trying to figure out how to get the answers to us without interfering with the prosecution's potential prosecution and current investigations going on in this case.
Both West Virginia lawmakers repeating that this is all a process.
There's two sides to process, and both of them are important. There's what the process is, and then there's whether a process is followed. And both of them matter. What we have to do is look at both. So part of what we do is say, do we have the right process in place? And we learn each time about whether we do or don't. But then we also ask, okay, was the process that we actually have implemented and followed? And one we have a lot of control over, one we have no control over really as legislators. So we have to learn everything we can about the first.
Sure.
And we're getting cooperation to figure out how to get into that some, because they are seeing some of those issues that if something had been different in code, then we could have responded differently this way. That's some of these conversations and questions that we're asking in there.
Lawmakers say Secretary Pursley has agreed to testify at interim meetings in August. Earlier this month, we did file a second document request with the Department of Human Services for information on the case we learned about through the whistleblower letter. And despite the press release issued last night stating they had no involvement, again, in Kyneddi's life before she died, the department told us as recently as Monday they need until June 5th to respond to that request.